Hello everyone and welcome back to the Simpleplanes tutorials series. This is tutorial number 4. Yes, I know it's taken a while for me to get around to it, but I'm back at least for a little bit. In the last video we went over fuselage pieces, nudging, and a wee bit of XML editing, so in this video, just to keep it kinda short, I'm going to be going over how to detail wings. Now, one thing to note, this is a very tedious and time-consuming process, at least if you really want to get some incredible level of detail. So for the sake of this video, I'm going to be showing mostly simplified examples, but you can go crazy as you see fit. Now, you may be wondering, on certain aircraft that you can see on the Simpleplanes website, how do they get the wings this smooth? Now, this is a build of my own, and this is my most polished example of the power of fuselage pieces for detailing. So let's go ahead and get started. So here I have 3 wing pieces lined up, and I'm going to show you the 2 or 3 different ways that you can detail your wing. Now, the first and most simple is just putting a fuselage block on your wing, rotating it so that it is sideways, and then going into fuselage shape and editing the height down to the rough height of the wing. I'm gonna guess it's 0.5. That works. You can really mess around with it a little bit just to get it as close as possible if you'd like. Then once that's done, let's go ahead and adjust the length to the rough length of the wing, and then adjust the run accordingly to get the tilt. You may have to reposition the fuselage and tinker with it a little bit. You can also reduce the width so that it's not such a large edge, or you can increase it and use the fill sliders to cut out the back. It's the wrong side there. I would not recommend going anything past 50% if you set the corners to circular. Let's just go ahead and give it a bit more length, a bit more run, and that looks good. Just nudge it a little bit. Once again, holding shift and using your WASDs, or if you don't have access to that, you can alternatively nudge by going over to the little airplane button over here, sorry, the rotate part option here, clicking on the wrench and gear, and you can see you can change part position here as well as the nudge amount. Changing this setting not only influences how far every shift plus key nudges, but also influences how far it nudges using these options here. This is actually a little too long. Let's go ahead and shorten it by 1 more. Here we go. And then if we really wanted to make this smoother, we could go back here, set the corners to circular. That smooths it out a little. Or you can even go overboard and set it over to manual and adjust each of the different edges to their own corner style. And if you want to make an airfoil, you can set the top end to circular and bottom end to curved. That creates a little airfoil like such, and that is roughly what an airfoil could look like in real life. You obviously don't have to do this, but it's ultimately up to you how much detail you would like to include in your wing. And I'm just going to go ahead and set this back to circular so I don't have to mess with custom settings. And once this is done, you just need to add whatever control surfaces you would like and go ahead and adjust them. Say we can leave it like this. And boom, that's a wing more or less detailed. Just feel free to stick the right paint job on there. And there's your detailed wing. This is the crudest form of detailing wing, and there's obviously way more detailed ways to do it. But if you really don't want to spend hours and hours on end getting all the shapes right, then this is the simplest way to do it. You don't have to mess with ailerons, you don't have to mess with too much XML editing or nudging. This is a really straightforward way for a simple proof of concept design if you so please. Now, the second way involves covering the entire wing with fuselage. So let's go ahead and grab another fuselage piece right here. Once again, rotate it sideways and slim it down. Let's, again, 0.25 was the rough height, and then 0.25 again. And let's go ahead and stretch it out. Rough length of this wing is 7.5. Back into the middle. And then we just got to adjust our width on one side, or I recommend doing the width on each side first. There we go. And actually make it a little bit wider for reasons you will see shortly. And then this side needs to be a lot wider. Add a bit of run in there. Push it forward, and bingo. It's fine if it overshoots a bit. Now, we're going to go ahead and go back in the settings and tinker with the left and right fill so that we can trim off the back into a flat surface. You may notice now that we are not going to be using ailerons on the wing, and here's why. Back of the wing itself is pretty flat, and that's not necessarily realistic, so we are going to now build the entire wing shape, including the aileron, out of fuselage pieces. So we're going to go ahead and duplicate our wing, cut it down to size. We'll keep the length. Let's say we want, let's go ahead and design an aileron first, and then we'll build around it. So let's add control surface, edit the shape. We'll call it something like that. And then we will get this, which we did here, cut the length down. Let's say, I'm going to guess 4. Quickly equalize the widths with 5, and then get rid of run 0. Fill this in again, and then bring it up. Here's going to be a flat section of the wing, and then we can use, once again, our cuts to whittle it down to size. And we'll do the same to the other side. Let's cut down the length again. And now we have a gap for our aileron. I'm not going to build it exactly to the slant because it's annoying. You can if you would like, but it will mean you will have to mess around with some more fuselage pieces. Excuse me, nudge. So now I'm going to go ahead and select my wing and then hide it. Now the hotkey on computer is H, but if you would like to hide a part otherwise, you simply select a part, go to view, and then one of these buttons here is hide part. Go ahead and select that. If you want to unhide it, it is this button here, second from the bottom, that's clear hidden part list. Keybind for hiding things is H, keybind for unhiding everything is Control-Shift-H. So we're going to go ahead and hide the wing. Next, because we're making an aileron, we'll go ahead and add a small hinge, or you can do a rotator. In this case, I will use a hinge, but for the second example of ailerons, I will use a rotator. I'm going to go ahead and add a hinge rotator, rotate it properly, and stick it right in there. We're going to use a bit of what we learned from XML editing and shrink the scale down to, say, 0.5. And then place it inside here if it will let me. Actually, I think the reason it's not letting me is because of attachments, so we'll go ahead and redo the attachments. To do that, we'll go ahead and hit on the rotate part option and click the attachment editor right here and redo attachment. I'm going to reconnect this. Say the middle attachment to the top attachment, I guess. I should be able to place it. No. Okay, we'll do it the other way around then. We will select the hinge, attachment editor, attach to middle. There. Now that's properly attached. It shows red, but it'll fix itself shortly. I'm going to go ahead and nudge this a bit further in so that the actual hinge piece that rotates right there is brushing up against the wall, just for a smoother rotation. Then we're going to grab another fuselage piece, stick it on the rotator, and bring it over to size. So it's going to need to be a bit more length. That's actually weird. Okay. Edit. Let's edit the right side, cut down the width just a little bit. And I gotta figure out how to fit this correctly. Right side needs to be a bit shorter, so we're gonna go ahead and shrink the fill, like so. Move it in. Still is a little bit too wide on that side. We'll shrink the fill again some more. And possibly add a little bit of run. Good enough, even though this side isn't perfect. So now if we go ahead and spawn it in and use our VTOL, the fuselage is attached to something. So if you make your fuselage like this and the fuselage doesn't move, click into the aileron's fuselage and go to your attachments and make sure it's not connected to anything it shouldn't be. In this case, this fuselage attachment shouldn't be there, so let's go ahead and get rid of it. As you can see, VTOL slider now moves that aileron. Now let's go ahead and hide the fuselage. Oh, gotta unhide the wing first, so clear hidden parts, hide the fuselage, and then we could delete this wing. I can't just yet because this fuselage isn't attached to anything, so I'm gonna go fix the attachments real quick. Okay, let's go ahead and get rid of the fuselage, or the wing, and that shouldn't get rid of everything else. There we go, brilliant. And now we are just left with the fuselage as a wing. There is just one problem about this though, and that is that fuselages do not produce lift on their own. And while they do produce drag, that's nowhere near enough to keep a plane in the air unless you really crank up the drag scale, and I heavily recommend you don't do that because wings are wings, and it's more efficient to use them. So we're going to re-add the wing. Go ahead and grab a structural wing as such. I'm gonna go ahead and lay it down on its side. Actually, it's better off to attach it from here because the wing might end up being upside down and then you'll get some weird pitch input that you really don't want. And then place the root of the wing on the fuselage wing start and edit the shape to fit inside of this fuselage wing. So something like, say, this. I have to make it a little bit smaller. There we go. From there, go ahead and slim down the wing by editing its base thickness. I'm going to set it about 50%, that usually works. And then nudge it inside of the wing itself. Make sure it's attached strictly to the main fuselage or whatever fuselage piece you would like to be connected to. And then now this wing will produce lift, but it will not have any sort of aileron input because the aileron doesn't have a wing in it yet. To remedy that, we will add yet another wing inside of the aileron, so that when the aileron deflects, the wing deflects. Then rotate it, and then adjust its size. Same song and dance as we did for the main wing. Just make sure that roughly fits inside, it needs to be a little shorter. That's the best we can really do. Good enough. And nudge it down. Now, double check attachments, so that's only connected fuselage, that's good. And now, when the aileron moves, the wing moves with it, although you can't really see it. In practice, however, when you get the actual aircraft flying, manipulating that wing will, or the aileron will produce lift and actual force, as opposed to just drag. So now that wing is functional. Now for the third example, I'm just going to copy this over and we're going to do the exact same thing. Matter of fact, I can just copy this entire wing over because instead of well, not the entire wing, I'll copy the main structure. What we're going to do instead is we're going to detail the ailerons a little bit differently because as you can see here, ailerons don't really look like this. So instead of having a fuselage turn sideways, we'll have a fuselage forward to back. So I'm just going to grab a new fuselage block, whittle it down to the 0.25, but this time set the corners to hard on both ends. And then on the side for the trailing edge of the wing, I'm going to set its height to 0. Now what that does is it creates a nice little airfoil like this. So we can edit the length, let's shorten that down a little bit. And it's fine if it merges inside of the wing, we'll actually hide the wing for the time being. And go ahead and nudge it up. Now, one major thing I'll point out is it is extremely difficult to use this aileron styling in a few circumstances. A, the back of your wing is not entirely horizontal, which leaves you with weird gaps like this, and the only way to get around that is to add a little bit of run to your aileron. Like such. I should need to be the other way around, do it negative. And then rotating the part ever so slightly, and that'll probably be the Y, okay. Nudge that forward, and there you have it. Second issue is that it's extremely difficult to get shapes for ailerons that look like this, where they are thinner on one side than they are on the other. Shapes like this are extremely difficult to pull off with fuselage pieces in this orientation, and you will likely have to use multiple, and aligning them can be an absolute pain. I spent about better part of 2 hours doing it on an example I'll show a bit later, but I don't recommend doing this for complex shapes. If you can avoid it, please do, but if you're a masochist, feel free to go at it. Personally, I prefer the way these look, but sometimes they're way more trouble than they are worth. Once again, we'll just add a aileron example here. We'll control surface just like we did on the other one, and we will adjust this piece to fit. Now, other thing I'd recommend doing is if you're going to add multiple pieces like this, in order to avoid editing connections, or the connection point as Simpleplanes views it, between two fuselages, disconnect your fuselage piece for your aileron or additional fuselage piece from the other fuselage piece or any other fuselage piece it's attached to, and re-add the connection using the middle, top, or bottom. If you use the front or back, then when you go to edit, I can show an example. If you go to edit the width of one side or height of one side, you will accidentally edit it on the other wing piece too, and it just becomes a pain. So I would recommend avoiding connections like that. And Simpleplanes will automatically create connections like that, so just make sure you double check before you go to edit, because we all know how reliable Simpleplanes Control-Z is. And not very reliable. And same old song and dance, we'll just go ahead and edit the fuselage to fit. Let's give it some more width, and nudge it over. It's a bit more actually. Go ahead and nudge that over. Perfect. Although, as you can see, I've also messed up the rotations because it's not perfectly straight. So I'll let it slide for now. If you want to obsess over it, feel free to. Let's again fix the connections so we can get rid of the wing later. And then for the final piece, stick it in there. Width is, what is it on this one? And then reorient that in. I know I haven't added my rotor yet. I'm going to do that afterwards. Go ahead and hide the wing. Hide this fuselage piece after we adjust its connections. Just reconnecting everything right now so I don't have to do it later. Hide that. Grab a hinge, but in this case I would recommend doing a rotor, and I will show you why in a moment. Add a, well, not rotor, rotator. Add that to the side like such here. Adjust its Y so that it's completely flat. Ah, wrong way around. Level, come on. There. Then move it all the way over to the side. Right. There, perfect. Then what I'm going to do is adjust its rotation so that the aileron moves properly and rotates properly, although this looks almost correct, just needs a few degrees. I'm eyeballing it, but if you really want, you could do the math and trig to figure out what angle this should be. Add this connection back to the fuselage. And then we're going to unhide this fuselage piece, get the wing out of here. Add the connection here. Once again, do the middle, and then the rotor head. There we go. This is still set to VTOL. Once again, make sure your connections are good with your aileron. This connection shouldn't be here to the fuselage, so we'll get rid of it. And now it's only connected to small rotator, which means we spawn it in, move our move our VTOL. The aileron will move too. And then once again, we can go back and unhide the wing. Let me make sure that everything is not all attached to the wing. It's fine, as long as everything's attached to this. Yep. Going to once again add the connection from here to fuselage. You don't need to do this in your own craft unless you're building it free floating like I am. Now that not everything is reliant on the wing, we'll just get rid of it. There we go. And now it's wingless, so we'll copy the exact same thing. You know, stick the wing on fuselage. Same shape. Nudge it inside. Do the same thing for the control surface. You'll also notice that on both wings, I've also missed the wing inside of these two pieces here. You can add them if you'd like. I'm omitting that just for simplicity's sake, in the interest of time. Go ahead and nudge that inside. Now this will be a bit too thick, so if you want to adjust that, just go back to edit, not edit wing shape, let's just fix the thickness. Call it 10%, it'll be a really thin wing. Then just got to copy the Y value here. There, and nudge it a little bit forward and it'll disappear. And once again, functioning wing surface that will produce lift and will produce roll force if needed. And then just to allow it to follow the right control scheme, because this is a main control surface, it's just a regular aileron on a wing, it's supposed to control roll, we'll just go into the hinges settings, adjust the speed, I prefer to have it a bit higher, but you can do lower if you so please. Adjust its range of motion, because it really shouldn't be deflecting more than 35 degrees in either direction, and then change its input to roll. Do the same thing here. $70, and then this should be roll. And now, with roll input, the ailerons deflect, and they're actually going the wrong way, so if that happens, just go into the control surface and hit invert, and then they will deflect the right direction. So now you have the 3 different wing types. Now you will notice that on each of them, when you go to deflect, there's a little gap between the aileron and the fuselage. So what I like to do is grab an extra fuselage, like so. Let's make sure the fill's all there. And then this should be a straight cylinder, so 0.25, 0.25. And then with the width of the aileron, which will be 3.25, so this length should be 3.25. We'll adjust the run after, slide it over into place like so, make sure it's not attached to anything it shouldn't be, that's good. Go ahead and line it up, and actually this should be a little bit smaller, we'll call it, let's call point, this is the right height, never mind, that's the right height. Now I just have to adjust the run. I'm gonna color this something different for my sake, I can't see what's going on. There. And we'll adjust the run, because it's too much run. Let's try 0.1, that's a bit too much, 0.05 then, sure. Nudge it backwards into place so that it's midway between the crack, and then just sink it into place with the same Y coordinate. That looks all right, I think. Go back a little more, there we go. And now that should still be connected, yep. Then, we deflect this aileron, you'll notice that there is a smooth piece in place that fills in the crack. This little detail I usually like to add to my ailerons. You absolutely don't have to, or if you have another way of detailing it, you may. But that is just how I personally like to do my ailerons. Now coming back to the aircraft I showed at the start of the video as an example, you'll see I have my ailerons here as roll, ailerons as pitch, and rudder. These do not have to be all flying, because the same way we made the ailerons on the wing, you can copy to the tail, although it is significantly easier to make an aileron as a horizontal stabilizer if it's an all-flying tail, because you just stick it on a rotor, whole thing moves, very easy. If I go ahead and hide the fuselage pieces, you can see where I have placed the wings in the fake wing. Now, this exception's a little bit different because I didn't spread the actual wing out to the same size as the cosmetic wing. And what I've done here is, in order to balance the center of mass and lift, I've shifted this actual wing up forward, and then I have adjusted its scale. It's about 1/4 of the size it should be, and then adjusted its... oh, never mind, I didn't adjust its lift scale. Interesting. Either way, that is a shrunk down wing, and the same is true for these aileron pieces. Now, if you have an aileron and you're having, or cosmetic aileron, and you're having issues getting the wing to be the right size, what you can do is shrink the wing down in your overload editors. You can do a half scale or a quarter scale or whatever, and by doing so, you're given a lot more freedom over fine detail movements or fine shape adjustments when you're editing the actual wing shape. Just a little trick that I thought is just generally useful and good to know. Because if you're making small ailerons like this, having a full 1-to-1 scale wing is really difficult to size properly when you're not able to very finely tweak each point. Now, as promised, an example of an oddly shaped Method 3 aileron is over here in the roll. Now, you'll notice here that that's two fuselage pieces merged together. And this was incredibly annoying, but you'll notice that the aileron shape tapers off as it reaches the end of the wing. And as I mentioned before, getting a shape like that with forward-facing fuselages is incredibly difficult. So I had to play around with rotation, fill, and size, and other fuselage parameters just in order to match it. And I'm getting paint on this one. Okay. In order to get a shape like that, I had to adjust two different fuselage pieces, each with different rotations and horizontal fills, and nudging together just to get them to fit in a more or less seamless manner. And even then, it's not perfect. If you view the fuselage correctly, you can see that there's a discrepancy. But it's good enough. Also, afterburner nozzle tutorial coming soon, TM. Also, another thing to note when you're doing the simplest method of wing detailing is that it is a very good idea to set the actual wing itself to be a structural wing, because if it is not a structural wing, you will have instances like this where if you pull any sort of G, the wing will flex and the fuselage will not. And this is exponentially worse on faster jets or faster aircraft where the wing will flex more as you pull more Gs. So in order to do that, all you need to do, grab a structural wing, check its part ID, which is wing 2, and go over to whatever wing already has an aileron on it if you want an aileron, because structural wings themselves cannot have aileron, but if you change a main wing into a structural wing, then it keeps the aileron. Grab the ID, go into Overload Editor and switch whatever wing you have to wing 2, and do the same for the rest. These were apparently already structural. And then since it disconnects everything, just go ahead and reattach whatever got disconnected. And you're good to go. As you can see here, I can maneuver with no flex whatsoever. It is worth noting that structural wings are heavier anyways, but if you really don't want them to be, you can edit their mass properties in Overload and bring them back down to something lighter. If you would like to hide your rotors and hinges, all you need to do is click on them, and this only applies to small rotators and hinges. Go into their overload, go into joint rotator, add a new line that says disable base mesh, and set that to true. And all that does is it hides their base mesh as such, and if I make everything visible again, boom, gone. It's just hidden there. Same thing works with small rotators. As you can see there, nice and hidden away. And one final thing I would like to note is that adding fuselages, or cosmetic wings as I like to call them, for your wings, it creates a lot of drag, which can slow your aircraft down a lot. So what I typically like to do is click into them and then edit their drag scale to something a bit smaller, especially when you're nudging parts inside of each other, like this fuselage piece here or this rotator. Each of them could have their own drag calculation if Simpleplanes deems it inside the airflow, aka not properly tucked away inside the aircraft. And so sometimes I will just outright disable drag calculation using this line here, but otherwise do recommend lowering your drag scale or maybe even mass scale a little bit, just so that you're not slowing your aircraft down any more than it has to be. Anywho, that's all I have for you today, so thank you all so much for watching. Hopefully this helps in your endeavor to make more realistic looking aircraft. Fuselage wings are such a great asset when detailing any airframe of yours. Just do keep in mind it takes a lot of time to do properly. Anywho, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like and maybe consider subscribing for my terrible upload schedule, and you'll be notified again if I finally self-resurrect and pick up where I left off. In the next video, I would ideally like to talk about flight computers, but if I find something a little more pressing, then I will talk about that beforehand. Otherwise, I will see you all in the next video.